You're listening to the Fitzrock Podcast, interviews where we explore the shifts and transitions of life. Here are your hosts, Keith Rock and Don Fitzsimmons. Hello, everybody. Today we are honored to have Dave Penrose. He's a longtime friend of Keith and mine. He has a master's in counseling psychology from Michigan State. He's an experienced behavior psychologist, and he's going to talk to us about the 6 stages of relationships. David, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be a part of the podcast.
David, man, so good to see you. We've recently all caught up and just excited for the many great things that have happened and continue to happen in your life.
Almost 50 years, some guys.
I know, it's incredible.
Crazy.
It is crazy.
You are going to speak with us today about six stages of relationship. Let's start with that. Go ahead.
Relationships. You know, it's interesting with the pandemic and social isolation that we're talking about relationship building skills, but among young people, ages roughly 12 to 20, relationships are one of the biggest areas of their life that provides a source of stress. And if you think back to the time when we were teenagers, where we had just become teenage 12, 13 years old, we didn't have the benefit of social media, we didn't have access to technology, and relationships were a pretty scary thing to think about, to talk about. And I don't recall anybody helping me to understand how I could be better at creating and cultivating and managing my relationships. And I'm not just talking about male-female relationships, I'm talking about friendships, pals, comrades, peers. And it's interesting, some research has been done that shows that the number one fear of a teenager when it comes to relationships is rejection of boys, teenage boys. The fear is rejection. You're going to put yourself out there and then you're going to be rejected. You're not going to get the kind of response, of a favorable response that you'd like. But among girls, the biggest fear is not being approached. So these fears compete with each other. They hold males back from initiating a relationship, and they make girls feel awkward so that it looks like they're not welcoming, but they're afraid. And of course, they don't want to appear overly eager. And keeping that in mind, my brother had all sorts of friends. He was very popular. He was 2 years older than I was, and I really struggled and had to work at relationships. And within the last 10 years, I articulated to be able to teach young adults who were dealing with social anxiety the 6 stages that all human relationships go through. And I found out that when I was speaking, it was benefiting adults as well. So keep in mind, there are over 7 billion people in the world, and every single person in the world wants to be known. They want to be known by others. And that's why I think sometimes we become overly obsessive about popularity and fame and stardom, but everybody wants to be known. And that gives all of us an advantage, because if you use that as your starting point, you realize there is never going to be any rejection. There's only going to be how far that human relationship evolves. And so I articulated these 6 very common sounding stages. And the final stage isn't really even a stage that a lot of people would think of as being the culmination of intimacy, but the stages are knowing somebody, liking somebody is number 2, trusting somebody is number 3, caring about somebody is number 4, loving somebody is number 5, and grief is number 6. And the earlier the stage, the more possible people it is to have a relationship with. So if we think of those as both discrete stages and abstract stages, kind of makes sense that the goal of any relationship, any time you have an opportunity to cross paths with somebody, let's say that you've never met before, your goal isn't to necessarily get to grief, it's to simply, how do I initiate it in the knowing stage? And then how do I recognize whether or not somebody, the other person in the relationship, is trying to hijack it to take it to another higher stage before it's really ready. And so that's really what I focus on when I teach young people.
But there are some stages there that intrigue me. So I don't know how you want to do it. If you want to talk about each one and go through them, or do you just want us to hit you with questions?
Well, let's start at least with the first 3 stages: the knowing, the liking, and the trusting of somebody. And knowing somebody always starts with the person giving you their name. So I teach people this fail-proof strategy. Never ask somebody their name. Use a little bit of NLP to trigger them giving you their name without them feeling pressured to give you their name. So for example, I would say to you, Keith, hi, I'm David, and you are, and most people immediately respond with their first name because they got it. You gave me your first name, I'm going to tell you what my first name is. I tell people that asking somebody what their name is usually triggers some negative emotions, because that's what police officers and people do who are in authority, because you're in trouble. What's your name, son? What's your name? And so I try to convince people to avoid that. But so the first thing is, I'm David, I've given you my name, and you are, and like I say, most people, there's nothing threatening about you saying Don, or Keith, or Sally, or whatever the name is. And then I usually encourage people to repeat, your name is Don, right? Right?
Right.
Yes, nothing threatening yet. And once you've got the person's name, you are in a relationship, formally in a relationship. And in this first stage, your goal is to get to know things about the other person that are non-threatening, that aren't overly private, overly sensitive details of their life, but details that perhaps they've never really shared with anybody. And I'll give you an example. I've used this example, I think, many times. So I would say, Don, I like the headset that you have on. Tell me the story behind the headset. And a lot of times somebody will say, well, there's no story. And I'll usually follow up with, well, unless you woke up with those on your head one morning, which, by the way, would be a pretty crazy story. There's a story to everything. You may not think that story is interesting enough to tell me, and you might not, because you don't know me, you might not even think I'm interested to hear the story. Because obviously, when we're getting to know somebody, we don't want to bore them because they will not want to explore getting to know us more after that. So by broaching the subject on something innocuous, like, I see you're wearing a brown shirt. Is brown your favorite color? Tell me how you picked out that particular brown shirt. And then after they tell me the details, which is the story, I usually follow that up with, and how many people have ever asked you to tell them this story? Usually the answer is 0. How many people have asked the story about the headphones? Well, you might get 1 or 2. But you know what? Out of 7.4 billion people, I really like my odds that I'm one of only 2 people who's ever heard that story. Now, this girl that I'm interested in getting to know has shared something with me that only a few people in her life have ever heard the story of. How do you not feel special? How do you not feel that you're starting the relationship on the right path? And I think when teenagers, of course, guys, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, and I'm not necessarily trying to regress, but I'm thinking, man, wouldn't this stuff have been helpful when we were younger? Oh, man.
It would have, yes. But
Yeah,
now, David, what about just same-sex friendships?
All human relationships are the same.
But would you ask the same questions or?
All the time.
Okay.
It's never personal. It's never so intimate. After you've been asking somebody the stories. Now, the other thing is that you're modeling for them how to engage with you in a conversation. So they'll usually follow, well, now I'm interested. What's the story about your sweater? What's the story about your shoes? Hey, I'm glad you asked, because nobody else has ever, and because I know the strategy, I automatically want to reinforce that. And so the questions usually focus around obvious things like a shirt they're wearing. I once asked a waiter, by the way, friends get better service in a restaurant. So start a relationship with your server because you'll get better service. Nothing selfish about that. That's just how it works. But I asked this waiter, he had these lime green frames on. And I'm thinking to myself, who in the world would wear the lime green frames? So I asked the story. I was just shocked to find that the actual story behind the glasses was he and his girlfriend told him he needed a new pair of glasses. And so they went online to this website where they could try on different pairs of glasses on your picture to see what you look like. And she liked the green ones, and that's what he bought. But I heard that story. Nobody else had ever heard that story before. I got a free piece of cheesecake out of that, which, by the way, huge reward.
Yeah.
You ever have any luck with what was your happiest memory, or tell me your story?
I think that's usually something that I encourage people to wait on asking those kinds of open questions, primarily because when you ask enough innocuous questions, especially if you're talking to girls, females, and a lot of their stories involve shopping at the same store, you're cataloging all of that information in your mind, and that lets you know other questions to ask in the future. People will talk to you about their favorite subject every time you give them a chance, and their favorite subject is themselves. And the favorite word, which is why the strategy works in the beginning, the favorite word is a person's name. You could be in a crowded room, but if you hear somebody yelling your name, you immediately pick on it. And You've been programmed to do that. So when they hear their name, because you're going to use it because they gave it to you to use, again, that deepens the relationship. Deepen, not necessarily to what we would call physical intimacy levels, because that really has nothing to do with the stages of human relationships. Those may be a factor. I mean, but let's face it, I mean, some people go out and are physically intimate with complete strangers, you know. So the next stage is liking. And the only way that you can know if you like someone is you have to know that person. If you find yourself at a point in time where you think, oh, well, I've been talking to this girl for, I don't know, 3 months now, and I don't really even know if I like her. I know I'm attracted to her, but I don't know if I like her. I guess I got to start thinking about asking questions that could delve into liking. Liking somebody is a tough stage, because if we want to really have a deeper relationship, again, if we're talking about young people, unmarried people, male-female relationships, or even a relationship where this person is famous and we want to really become a deeper friend to that person, we'll ignore some of the details of their life, which could affect whether or not we like them. And so we kind of ignore it and cover it up. And I'm sure you all have experiences in friendships, relationships, where eventually the liking thing catches up to you. And, you might say, I'm a behaviorist. So we have this tendency to speak very bluntly about things without using much of a social filter. Not that it's vulgar, but it can seem a little inappropriate. But I'm with somebody and they're an extrovert, meaning they like to hear their own voice, whether it's coming out as words or other guttural sounds. They may not say excuse me, or they may not have made an effort. How, if I'm in denial, I'm going to pretend like that really didn't bother me, but deep down it makes me kind of cringe. So liking is a really, really important stage, especially in relationships that you want to get serious. You need to be honest with yourself. And then the reason that that's important is because that segues into trusting a person. And trust is what is created when a person is and does and says what they are and say they will do. If I say, I'm a Christian, but yet I don't, my actions don't match that, then you know what? I'm eroding trust. I'm not who I'm presenting myself to be. And so that's really important in relationships. Just be yourself. And the reason you want to be yourself is because it's not worth to try to trick your way into any of the more intense stages of the relationships, because it comes back, to haunt you. If that person discovers that, you lied or you pretended to be somebody that you're not, hey, at least I still had a relationship, may have to end there. Or I call it plateau. And plateaus there. You still have the relationship with somebody, but it reaches its highest possible point. So that's as much of a theoretical framework, I think, as I want to lay down for these first three, give you guys an opportunity to ask questions.
So I guess I'm curious about when we talk about liking someone, and you're going to talk about loving here in a few minutes, I know, and the differences. Yeah. But when you're talking about liking, you're saying it's still just ask the questions, get to know the person, And be authentic.
Be authentic. It's absolutely important. And honest with yourself. Because you either like it or you don't.
Right. So it's interesting because some people would say it's important to be authentic right up front. And I'm assuming that you can pass through those first two stages rather quickly. Is that
Generally
correct?
not. That's the
Okay,
problem.
talk more about that.
Part of the problem is that people don't realize that the getting to know somebody is absolutely critical. And you both are married and have been married for a while, and you understand that even after you've been with somebody for years, it's possible that you look at that person and you say, you know what, I guess I didn't really know you as well as I thought I did. Yes, you logged a lot of time with that person. You've had a lot of conversations with that person. But getting to know somebody is probably as important as being authentic. You know, it's as important as being truthful, and honest, and generous. I mean, all of the great qualities that we look for in our human relationships. But if we accepted the fact that knowing is that important of a stage, we would never feel the sense to rush it. And the reason that we typically rush it is because we have an agenda to push push through the relationship to get it more intimate, more friends, more pals. Typically, the emotional feeling of, I feel like this person's coming on too strong. I feel like they're kind of crowding into my space. That's typically because people have tried to rush through those stages of the relationship. And let's go back to what it was like as a teenager, because you're transitioning to adulthood, meaning you're trying to figure out how to be successful at adult kinds of things, and relationships, jobs, responsibility, all of those things are related. And looking back at this point, how much more satisfied you would be to know that, and again, it's not just male, female, it's all relationships, that this person who I'm attracted by, there's something about this person that makes me want to be around them. And don't mistake that for liking, loving, the stages of the relationship. There's something physiological going on. There's any number of things that make people attractive to one another. I'll give you an example. I'm very attracted to Denzel Washington. I can't explain it. Yeah, I find him as being really energetic, full of life, dynamic, and every time I get a chance to see a video or a movie that he's made, I watch it, and there's just something really reinforcing about it. I think I'd like to get to know him as a person, but now he doesn't have that same attitude, that same level of attraction to me. So because of that, I have to step out of the attraction experience and progress through those stages of, well, if I'm ever going to have any hope of getting into a BFF kind of relationship with Denzel Washington, I got to start with knowing. He's got to know my name. She has to know my name. She has to know a little bit about me. And what's really interesting is, because I'd seen teenagers do this, after they get to know somebody in a group exercise and they break off into their own cliques or friendships, the other girls or the other people in that group begin to ask, tell me a little bit more about this person. I see you know that person. what is it about that person, you know? And oh yeah, they've told me a couple of stories about, you know, he wears these leather fringed, you know, buckskin kind of boots. He's got some tie-dye jeans. Man, I'm really dating myself. And he told me, you know, how he saved up the money and did that. Wow, you guys must be close. No, we're just getting to know each other.
Hey,
So I think that what can happen is when you get to know somebody, you're obviously spending more time with that person, and that may give there more time for the physiology to kind of fuel the attraction and desire to spend more time with that person.
hey, Dave, like we're kind of getting closer to our time, but one
Sure.
thing I'd like you to leave us with, if you could, and maybe in a short version, is like when you get to the love, can love be like between friends of the same sex? Can they be a love of people with the opposite sex? And I'm not talking about love in like a sexual way. Can you
Yeah.
give us a
Let me
little
go
thought
through
about
those
that?
final three real quick because those are stages people rarely even get to. Caring is the stage when you're thinking about this person, but the other person doesn't know that you're thinking about them. That's usually where the best relationships, that's probably where 90% of all relationships, marriages are stuck at. And it's an important relationship because it doesn't get reinforced, it doesn't get rewarded like the liking and trusting does. Loving, I used to describe this stage, the biblical concept of when you're ready to die in place of another person, you love that person. If you're not there yet, you just care about that person. So I would be willing to have died in place of a very, very good friend of mine who committed suicide, my parents, my grandmother, and my children. So there are probably actually 10 people in the world that I actually have loved or love to that extent. Everybody else that's close, I care about. So yes, the answer to your question is you can love somebody, but it's really, really rare. And the grieving, which is the final stage, is the stage that a relationship moves into because you can't go any further. A person's passed away. You don't have the opportunity to call them on the phone anymore. Maybe you love this person and they cut you off. They just divorce themselves from you, not legally divorced, but emotionally, physically, they divorce themselves. So you're stuck in grief. And grief is just the awareness of the pain that's caused by the hole that's left from that person. So the 6 stages that all human relationships go through: getting to know somebody, liking somebody, trusting somebody, caring about somebody, loving somebody, and grieving for somebody.
Wow, those are really helpful. David, how can people get a hold of you if they want to know more?
Sure, reach out to me on Facebook because I'm on there a lot. And I do have a website for the Friend Doctor, but I haven't been doing it a lot because I've been focusing on some other things. And I'm working on a book that will explain the 6 stages. And hopefully after I get that done, you guys will have me back and we'll talk a little bit more about the book. But yeah, especially if you know somebody who's 12 to 20 who's struggling with friendships and relationships, reach out to me because I could have some really helpful strategies to help that person jumpstart their relationship.
You certainly do. And thanks so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. It was a wonderful time being with you again.
All right.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fitz Rock Podcast. The music you are hearing is Swim with Wild Musical Instruments by Your My Muse. Copyright 2019 and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial License. Until next time, have a fantastic life.
Half marathon.